Hello and welcome to Australian Search Marketing Academy. It's Peter Mead, and today we have a topic all SEOs should care about: Google featured snippets, the Discover feed, and more must-know SEO insights with Brodie Clark. So firstly, let me introduce Brodie. So Brodie is an SEO consultant, very well known. He's a consultant based in Melbourne. He consults for mid to large size companies locally and internationally, and he writes about his own tried and tested ideas in his own blog, but also his famous columns at Search Engine Land and Search Engine Journal. Thank you so much for joining us, Brodie, and how are you today?
Hey, Peter. Yeah, I'm great, thank you. Great to be here.
Great, such an exciting topic. And let's introduce Nick Ranger. Nick Ranger, SEO specialist at Studio Hawk, overseeing digital strategy, data analysis, content and site architecture for large enterprise and local businesses. So Nick is focused on data-driven results and does a mean technical SEO audit and makes a huge impact for highly competitive industries. And I have the pleasure of working with Nick over at Studio Hawk as well. And I've got to say, very impressive results for competitive industries. So, but that's my welcome to you, Nick. And how are you today?
I'm super duper. It's awesome that we are doing this here live in Australia with like real Australian times, which is awesome. Super excited to be here and to talk about this topic with Featured Snippets, the Google Discover feed, and to have Brodie here as well. One thing that I'd really like to have a little bit of a shout out for Brodie. Brodie is SEMRush's Young Australian SEO of the Year, which is fantastic. And I really enjoy reading all of your content and being friends in real life, which is really awesome.
Absolutely, I agree with that. Yeah, learnt so much from Brodie, and also going along to meetups, conferences, and yeah, absolutely so chuffed to have you on the show for our Australian audience. Brodie, tell us about about our topic today. Shall we dive straight in?
Yeah.
Have you got slides for us?
I do have some slides. So yeah, the topic I wanted to go through today, it'll be mainly focused on featured snippets. I guess that's always kind of been a popular topic in the past couple of years, so it's always good to cover it. But there's been a lot of updates in more recent months, in 2020 in particular. So I wanted to go over a lot of those updates, and also wanted to just touch on some other interesting areas of SEO that are developing pretty fast at the moment. So one of those is Google Discover. Very important for publishers, anyone who spends a lot of time investing in their content, has a blog, and wants to get more traffic from Google. That's one area that I've been focusing on a bit for my own personal SEO blog, just on my site. And I'm noticing a lot of other consultants with smaller SEO blogs getting traffic from Discover in the last 6 months. So it's definitely seeing some developments there. And it's not just the big sites that are getting included. So really interesting area.
Terrific. So, awesome. So if you're happy for us to have a bit of a conversational style, Nick and I might just ask you some burning questions when they come into our mind as you're doing your presentation.
Yeah, perfect. I'll keep an eye out for the live comments as well as we go. But yeah, feel free to interrupt me and ask questions. We'll see how we go. All right, I'll just share my screen. How's that looking?
Looks great.
Perfect. All right, so let's jump into it. So Peter's already given me a nice introduction. Same with Nick, I really appreciate it. So a bit of background, I'm a consultant based in Australia. I work primarily with bigger companies. at the moment, I'm working with a couple of news publishers in different niches, and also e-commerce and also local business. So I'm still pretty broad with the types of clients that I work with, and they all kind of work with different products. So like the local business is very focused on Google My Business, and like the news publisher is focused on Google Discover as well. And as Nick kindly mentioned, I do a lot of blogging as well. There's a couple of logos down there for a few of the columns that I've been writing out more recently, and I also write on my own blog as well. So there's a photo of me looking fancy on a stage, but what I'm actually doing is I'm in my office and I'm thinking about what in the world is going on with featured snippets right now. There's just so many changes and it's just hard to get your head around it. So in this presentation, I'm going to go through some of those updates and a lot of the different areas that you can look out for in 2020. So before we jump straight into it, just wanted to cover some of the basics on featured snippets. So effectively, there's 4 types of featured snippets that you might come across on Google. So the first one is the paragraph snippet. So that'll generally be a segment of text extracted from a page, and it'll tend to sit around the 40 to 60 word bracket. And you've got table snippets, and that's tabular data taken from a page. So it's generally a table built with HTML, and that can be 3 by 9. And you've got the unordered list, and that can be up to 8 items. So that's just a list featured snippet. And you've got the ordered list, so that's 1, 2, 3, etc. And that's also up to 8 lines. So they're the different types of featured snippets, and that's generally how content is represented on Google when it's extracted from a web page. Okay, so myths with featured snippets. There's a lot of different myths with this type of feature on Google that I do come across pretty often still. So one of the bigger ones is the myth that schema markup on a website will help you rank for a featured snippet. So this is a myth, but I think there's a bit more confusion around the terminology there rather than it being something that people are saying that doesn't exist. So the myth is that basically structured data relates to schema.org in the SEO world. That's kind of like the terminology that you'd use there. But a lot of people associate structured data as in content on a web page that's structured in a particular way, but we would refer to that as content structure with HTML. So structured data, schema, doesn't relate to featured snippets, but content structure with HTML, that does. Another myth that FAQ pages are good pages for featured snippets just because they've got the question and answer format. That's generally not true, because a lot of content that Google extracts to show in featured snippets is generally a lot more comprehensive, and FAQ pages generally aren't, because there's not a lot of context for those questions and answers. So FAQ pages generally not good for featured snippets. Another myth is that there is a preferred featured snippet format for Google. And this is one that's constantly changing at the moment. So more recently, I've noticed that Google is showing table featured snippets a lot less for certain queries. But the data here from Proficient Digital, Eric Enger, is that broadly speaking, if you were to look at data for like paragraphs, lists and tables and other types of featured snippets, you might get a particular percentage. But if you look at a very specific segment, you might find that something like paragraph snippets are used far less. So that's something to keep in mind, that featured snippets are really a site by site, a SERP feature, or industry by industry. So it's good to have a look at the landscape and see what sort of featured snippets Google is showing for a website. Okay, so a big featured snippet update happened recently. So with this update in December of 2019, this was like a big change on Google, and it was something that really got a lot of SEOs worked up or a bit confused at what Google was trying to do. So essentially what has happened was that Google went from duplicating the second URL in search results to not duplicating it. So it would just show the featured snippet as the top result. So we shouldn't really refer to that top result as position 0 anymore. So that was kind of how you'd talk about it with featured snippets. You'd have position 0, then you'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And you might and then you would have that same position 0 result repeated in one of the results below that. So that's no longer, it's a thing, and that's just something that we've got to work around. One of the impacts of that particular update was that if you rank in a featured snippet previously, you could have your same page repeated in search results below, and that would give you the opportunity to have a rich result if you're using Schema. So you could rank in the featured snippet, then you could double dip is what it's been referenced as, and have your result showing below that with a rich result. So now it's essentially a trade-off between the two. So you could rank in the featured snippet, not have the rich result, or you could rank just below the featured snippet and have a rich result. So the example I have here by Claire Carlisle was that she had a page with FAQ schema, and she had that ranking below the featured snippet, and now it's a trade-off. She could only get the featured snippet.
I got a question for you, Brodie.
Yeah, please.
What's your personal preference? You prefer the featured snippet, or you prefer the rich result?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's for a lot of SEOs, it's a really contentious topic. For me, I'm going to take that featured snippet over that.
It's up the top, right? It's higher.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to take that result up the top.
Yeah,
basically every time, just because when you look at it on a mobile device as well, think about how far you have to scroll to even see that rich result if you were to rank below there. And then it's just about how you structure your content to make sure that readers still want to click through and learn more. And some topics, maybe they don't need to, but other topics, they probably do need some context. So yeah, in a case study on Moz, they found that not ranking in that second spot resulted in a 23% decrease in clicks based on Search Console data. And this is something that I wanted to put in because it's in Google's official documentation, but it's not something that I have ever recommended, and it's not something that I've seen anyone else actually do seriously outside of just a SEO test on their own site. But you do have the ability to limit the snippet that Google shows and potentially stop it from showing if you want to rank below for whatever reason.
I was actually going to maybe interject and ask a question whether you'd ever use the max snippet or the no snippet tag.
Yeah, I haven't found a situation where it's necessary. Yeah, so I haven't personally. I'm open to ideas from people if they have run a test and they did see good results, but I haven't seen that yet. Yeah. And the upside of the second URL not being duplicated in search results is that some pages actually saw a bit of an uplift. So a page that was potentially ranking below might actually improve in ranking because they don't have that second URL to compete with. I just wanted to move on to another case study. So this is based on a project that I did where a website was ranking highly for a lot of different queries in the organic results, but they were never ranking for a featured snippet. And this is really odd for this particular site, which I'll get into in just a moment. But the highest result that they were ever ranking, even if they had the best content for the query, was just below the featured snippet. And this is just a screenshot of their traffic, so estimation based on Ahrefs. I think in Search Console from memory, they were getting like 150,000 clicks a day. So that's a lot of traffic and a lot of potential to rank in featured snippets. And the process that I did to actually confirm that they weren't ranking in any featured snippets was I generally use Ahrefs for this. You can also use SEMRush. They do exactly the same thing. They just show it in a different visualization. But in Ahrefs, you can just filter by featured snippets, look at where those queries are ranking and see the top result. So for this particular site, I could see that number 2 was the top result for them. And also then what I did was I looked at using big data. I looked at all their competing sites and looked at whether they had featured snippets for a lot of the similar queries. So sites which wrote about similar topic should potentially have the same issue, right? If they're not showing up. And what I found was that, yes, a lot of the other competing sites, a lot of other big sites weren't ranking for featured snippets too. It was a lot of smaller sites, which were seemingly unrelated, were taking the featured snippet spot. So it was about 80% of the competitors weren't ranking for featured snippets and the remainder were ranking. So that's basically Google saying algorithmically for this segment, I'm not going to let sites rank for this result, but they're not going to be able to pick up everything algorithmically, obviously. Now, looking at Google's guidelines for featured snippets, so this is explicitly for featured snippet results on Google, is that they basically reserve the right to stop you from ranking those results if you fall into any of these categories. So the categories are sexually explicit, hateful, violent, dangerous and harmful, and lack of consensus on public interest topics. So that's really important information to keep in mind. So with my client, I can tell you they didn't fall into any of those categories, obviously. Like there wasn't an obvious area which, looking at the site and knowing the business, that they did fall into, but the fact that a lot of their competitors weren't ranking for featured snippets makes that pretty clear. And I did confirm this with John from Google, who's always extremely helpful with these sorts of topics. And he does mention that nothing special was happening there. So it's not like one of their engineers has gone into the site and said, ticked a box saying this site can't rank for featured snippets. It's just their guidelines and there's no way to force a page to do that. So essentially the learning from that is if you can confirm that a site may potentially fall into a category like that and they don't rank for featured snippets, don't invest a lot of resources into trying to force it. So don't try and change your content on your page to try and rank for featured snippets. Don't try and clean up the code or anything like that, because you're just going to be wasting time and resources. Okay, so we'll move on to more updates with featured snippets. So this one is more of a recent development. So AMP, accelerated mobile pages highlighting of content. This one has been around for a bit longer, I think from memory, maybe like a year and a half, maybe 2 years. And what will happen is that if a web page is using the AMP framework, Google AMP framework, if you click on a featured snippet result on your phone, and the featured snippet is a paragraph snippet, there may be the potential that the content will be highlighted and scrolled to that particular piece of text on the page. So that's kind of the development of something that's now very widespread on Google. So the change more recently, so I think this is about a year ago now, was that Google was then using Chrome to basically mimic the same functionality of AMP. So they're using a browser to actually highlight the content and scroll to it instead of one of the AMP framework. And when that first rolled out, it was using a little hash target text in the URL, and now that's moved to a different format more recently. And yeah, that's basically what is being used at the moment on both mobile and desktop when the Chrome browser is being used. And that's, again, primarily when a paragraph snippet is being used.
So,
okay, so we might move,
can I,
yeah.
is there any comments about that kind of scrolling to the highlighted position? I mean, what does that essentially mean so far as SEO? People, is it scrolling right past other important sections on the page? Is it potentially, hurting businesses, or is it just a great thing because people can go straight to that little bit and see exactly what they want and then go on with their life? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. When I first wrote about it over a year ago now, my opinion was that this is an awesome feature for users in part. So when I have used this in the past, I thought, oh, that's been super useful. I can just scroll to the bit that I'm most interested in if the query is right. But this feature still hasn't been refined fully just yet. A lot of the times it doesn't actually work, even if the URL has been manipulated. And sometimes it just like highlights part of the page. So it's still a bit buggy, even though they have rolled it out. But my opinion is that, yeah, you just have to test it out for yourself, see how it's impacting you. And I did write an article last week about how you can use Google Tag Manager and Google Analytics to actually import that data using custom dimensions. So you can use that scroll to text fragment data, take it into Google Analytics, and actually calculate a number of how many times featured snippets are being clicked. So there's data that can be used to figure out how it's impacting you.
Yeah. One more question about that. As far as like being able to measure these results, I would imagine that it could affect just the measurements, because they would be like, would you like, treat them as like two separate like URLs because it is manipulating the URL, or would you canonicalize this? Like, how would you recommend to look at that?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment it's still so early, but I think if you're using the Google Analytics method to look at that data, you can separate the two effectively. But when you separate it to the pages that don't have that scroll to text fragment, you can't actually be confident that someone has clicked on a featured snippet. So there's a lot of quirks to the data, and you kind of got to like dig through it and figure out what the case is for a particular site.
Yeah. I read that blog actually because I thought it was like, oh, that's really interesting. You can use GTM to be able to track these, so to speak. Like, you mentioned in it that it was like a loophole that could go away tomorrow. Like, can you elaborate a little bit more on that? Because I think that was something that really interests me.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that wasn't intentional from Google. It was based on a bunch of discussions on Twitter, and I kind of compiled them all and wrote about them on my blog and kind of put it into more of a process. But when that was shared on Twitter, I think it was a Chrome or a Google engineer who commented on the thread and said, "Hey, I'm not sure if this is intentional. I've filed a bug report for this. I'm not sure what's going to happen. Just FYI." Right. So yeah, I made that clear at the start of the article that if you're going to take this approach, don't rely on it, and don't spend like countless hours trying to set it up, because it could be a waste of time.
Yeah, I think for some of this stuff, there's always like that question of like, what's the overall effect, like what's the ROI of being able to like, look at this a little bit more closely.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's good having that extra bit of data, and it's something that is a bit concerning that Google is taking over the content on your page and highlighting different sections and changing the experience for searches on your actual website. So yeah,
on your site, right? I mean, a lot of SEOs feel like that's really overreach, because you're not just taking the featured snippet or taking the content and putting it on their site, on their search results. They're now kind of manipulating the way that the user is going to get the experience on your site, right? Which is kind of feels, I can see why a lot of SEOs are, what's the word? Divided? I don't know. I'm not sure what the word is, but I mean, it's the ongoing march, isn't it, of all the different, the approaching where we're going with all this stuff. But there's a couple, before going on to Google Discover feed, there was a couple of questions. Nick, did you want to ask? There was one.
There's a couple of questions from here. So the first question, and there's two, so I'll just we'll do it like that. So we've got a question. I've seen Nick, pages.
I'll just jump in there while you talk. I'm just going to switch my AirPods because one of them's going flat. So this will be seamless for anyone who's watching.
All right, no worries.
Now for my next trick.
I've seen pages where I've added FAQ schema start to produce featured snippets for some terms. Has Brodie seen this happen? Also say hello from me. I kind of just copied out the question, so I don't remember who that's from.
That's Andy Simpson.
Awesome.
So hi from Andy Simpson.
Yeah.
And we'll just maybe keep talking a little bit until Brodie comes back online. You're muted, Brodie.
Yeah, I think he's doing that while he's trying to figure out the technical.
How's that sounding?
Yeah,
sounds okay.
Much better. There's no feedback.
Sorry, I caught part of that question.
That's all right. So it's a question from Andy Simpson, who says hello, about FAQ schema starting to produce featured snippets for some terms, and whether or not you've seen similar.
I haven't seen FAQ schema develop that. That was one of the things that I mentioned at the start of the post. That at the start of the presentation, is that structured data shouldn't influence featured snippets at the top results.
Yeah.
But that might just be a terminology confusion there. But yeah, anyway, hi Andy. If Andy wants to put more details in the comment section, that would be awesome.
Yeah. Well, maybe just for for people out there, their own edification, like if they do have FAQs like at the bottom of like their service pages or product pages, like what have you, what is there anything that you can say that you've seen that really helps to leverage that featured snippet opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned earlier about the content being more comprehensive is what Google will generally like to pick for featured snippets. So if you're just creating a short blog article that just answers a question very quickly without much context around that, Google is probably less likely to use that as a featured snippet compared to an article that is more thorough on a topic, maybe has more references from other parts of the web to show that it's a credible answer, it's kept up to date, structured correctly. That's kind of the formula to get the best results there. Or otherwise, it doesn't always have to be a really long form piece of content. You could just be maybe the first publisher to write about that topic. So Google does try to make a concerted effort to reward sites for producing information first. So if you provide an answer to a particular question, the first on the web, and then another website with higher authority writes about it a week later and uses the exact same answer, in theory, you should be able to keep that result, even though your site doesn't have the authority and maybe your article isn't as long as them. But that's a theory. If you're the first one to write about something and you're the primary source of a piece of content, you should be the one to get the top result.
Yeah. Do you think that that's a bit of a like an argument for evergreen content, where you've got a page that you've just incrementally as the news changes, or the situation around that particular topic changes, that you go back to that page and rewrite that and then have that updated?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a smart approach. Like starting with a URL that is a bit more broad rather than specific to just the topic. So for instance, when I wrote about Chrome, it was actually the original article when I was writing about AMP being used to highlight content on a page. The URL that I used for that was something that allowed me to expand on that article later. So when Google announced that they're going to start using Chrome to highlight content, I was able to update that article and include, okay, it's not just AMP, it's also Chrome being used, and here's some additional information. Here's some like references to other things that I've said on Twitter or whatever. But that sort of thing is good if it's still a developing topic, and that obviously doesn't apply to everything. Like you want to add value to your content if you're gonna send a signal to Google that a big section of content here has changed. Like you don't just want to like go in and add a bunch of keywords and just like bulk it out a bit.
We can't just put keywords in there and what? Yeah, why not?
Go on.
I've done some keyword research. I found a few more long tail words I'm going to jam in my content.
Yeah.
That's so 2011.
Yeah.
Hey, another question before we go on to the Google Discover feed. We got one here from Ivan Esposito. I hope I've pronounced your name properly there. So with conversion rate as a priority, would you go after featured snippet, knowing that users may take the info and go to a competitor site, resulting in missed traffic and opportunity for retargeting?
Yeah, I mean,
what's the feeling about that?
This is kind of one of those ones where it's really a perspective type thing. So when I approach these sort of things with my clients, if they were to say, I don't want to rank in the featured snippets because maybe we're not going to get the click, or maybe someone might get the answer from that and go to a competitor website, which it sounds like Ivan might be mentioning. I think there's just so much opportunity out there, and that's just kind of been my approach from the start. That there's definitely some downsides to featured snippets, but look, if it's not your site being shown in the top position, it's going to be a competitor site. So invest as much time in getting that position as you think is worthwhile to you. So don't spend a lot of time investing in something that you're confident won't give you a return. But there's plenty of other opportunities outside of featured snippets. It's just one certain feature.
So keep it in perspective. And I mean, if you want to, you can tell Google not to use featured snippets with some of those tagging that you highlighted earlier in your presentation.
Yeah.
But other than that, let's keep it in perspective. It's one tool in your toolkit of SEO.
That's it, Peter. All right. Should we move on to the Discover feed? I feel like this is more of an exciting topic that shouldn't frustrate people as much and kind of is a glimmer of hope in the SEO world.
Okay.
So,
we like that. It's a diamond in the rough. Okay.
That's it. Okay. Let's jump back. So I wanted to go through a case study of my first article on my own blog that got added to Google's Discover feed. So this is at the beginning of this year. Since writing this presentation, I actually had another article added to the Discover feed. So I've been writing a bunch of tweets on Twitter. So you can just, if you want to scroll through my feed and track some of those down, but I've uploaded the data on there so you can check it out. But for this first article, it resulted in a pretty big uptick to my blog. So I'd published a few different articles earlier in the year, and they generally just get a lot of traffic from social and like email newsletters. There's some awesome newsletters out there that I subscribe to that are nice enough to add me to them. But this one resulted in getting added to Google's Discover feed and resulting in a huge uptick. So I'll go through that and show what the result was. So this is the article here. This is something that Nick and I were speaking at before the webinar started about this funny feature image that I put together pretty quickly. But what happened was my article got added to the Discover feed. So this is the feed that will show on different devices differently. I think on Android, if you swipe right, you can access the feed. On my iPhone, I use the Google app, and it's on the homepage of that. And I think there's another way that you can access it, but it's still not really integrated into the Google ecosystem as much as it probably could. But there's a lot of opportunity there. So my article, when it got added to this feed, it resulted in 482 clicks from Google Discover and around about 5,000 impressions. So this is an example of a client of mine, which got an article added to Google's Discover feed. So it's a news publisher client. And what I tend to see is that when an article gets added to the feed, unlike Google search in the web search results, you'll rank until Google thinks is relevant to do so in a particular position. But in Google's Discover feed, what I see is that when an article gets added, so like similar to my post here, it'll tend to just stick around for 3 days. And that's kind of the average that I see across sites that I work with who are publishers. So it'll get put into the feed. So this is an example of just one page on a website. It'll get put into the feed. We get a big uptick in visibility. Then Google will constantly use signals to figure out how long they're going to leave it in the feed. So sometimes you might see an article that comes in for a day, then it's just like out the next day. And you're like, whoa, that was a wild roller coaster ride. But a lot of the time it's 3 days. It'll be a big uptick on the first day, probably around about the same on the second day. Then the third day is on its way out. So it has like a little bit of traffic on the way out, then it's gone.
Yeah, I've noticed that too, Brodie. Yeah, when something comes in from Discover feed, that it just sort of spikes, and quite often it can be quite a really big spike. And it just sort of really kicks up and then drops off quite quickly.
Exactly. Yeah, and something to keep in mind with this. This is something that I've spoken about a fair bit with Glenn and Gabe as well, who works with publishers as well, is that you can't be overly reliant on this traffic source. It does share a lot of the attributes that Google search does, just with how it assesses quality of content. And the way that we know that is that when Google rolls out their core updates, which they've been doing a few times each year at the moment, when they roll those out, your Discover feed can actually just be impacted on its own and not have your web search results. So like if you're ranking in top stories, that can remain unchanged, but Discover can be gone in a day. So for one client I work with, they get around about 60% of their Google organic, so Google traffic from Discover, which is a lot.
That is,
and that's mainly because some of their articles just get like crazy uplifts. So like sometimes like 150,000 clicks in just a day, then it'll be gone for a few days and it'll come back. And for that reason, that's something that I make clear to my clients, is that don't rely on that as a traffic source, because a core update could come along and decide that, no, we're not going to put you in the Discover feed anymore. And you might see like a substantial decline in visibility. So don't be reliant on it. But so this example that I have here, so this is the same page as this graph here. So this is using the Discover tab in Google Search Console. So this page in Discover got around about 22,000 clicks. And if you look at the same article in just Google search, web search results, so this can be top stories and also just like standard results below that. And yeah, you can see here that the difference is huge. So in Discover, 22,000, and in web search, 350 clicks for the same article. So that's a very different strategy for that piece of content. So it's not designed to rank for the long term, because it's a news-based article. Like as time goes on, it becomes less relevant.
Yeah, we've got a little bit of a comment from Andy here saying like that's don't you think Discover is biased between users' interests and Android users and things like that? I think Google Discover automatically shows personalized content based on like their search history or their app activity or even their browser history and the location. So yes, it is biased, but at the same time, like this is like kind of audience targeting. Like this is essentially like getting it to users and using all these more personalized personalized results. Do you think, maybe a question from that, do you think that that's really attributes to like the much higher CTR that you might see for these kinds of results? Brodie?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I wrote about this on Twitter. I don't have this in this presentation, but one of the things that I saw from my more recent article that went into Discover, and I see this across clients as well, this is just when you're talking about your own blog, you just know it inside out, and you just know the content so well that you can kind of get these sort of insights. But with my more recent article, so my first article was about structured data, FAQ schema in particular, that got added. So that's a very niche topic, even in the SEO world. Like it's a very specific thing. Yeah. Whereas my latest one was about featured snippets, so pretty niche topic, but it was also about Chrome, Google Analytics, and also Google Tag Manager. So it's about all these different topics that are so much broader than just SEO, because everyone who uses a website for the most part is familiar with Google Analytics, and a lot of those are also familiar with Google Tag Manager and Chrome. So that's reaching a far broader audience, just interest-based, just purely.
Yeah. Also, from so far as the topics, I've noticed that the Google Discover on Android has recently changed the way that you follow the topics. Previously, it was showing more like, I'm interested, show me more, or show me less. But now it's much more about following certain topics, and they're very broad topics too. Like you were saying about things like, whether it's Chrome or Google Tag Manager, all those kind of really broad topics. So, I call them broad, but maybe they're not. I'm sure Google knows what they're doing.
Yeah, and that's what I saw for my latest article that got put into Discovery. It had like almost 3 times the amount of impressions that my first article did, and it got fairly similar amount of clicks, but the click-through rate was far less, which is pretty interesting to note that maybe Google put it in their Discover feed because they saw, oh, this is about Google Analytics and Google Tag Manager. Then someone's scrolling through their feed and they see, oh no, this is actually about featured snippets. I have no idea what that is, and it's not something I'm interested in, so they might just scroll past it. So it's there's a lot of different factors at play.
Yeah, because users can provide like their own direct feedback. Like they can show more or show less, and they can basically just tailor and choose to see what they want to see from certain publishers.
Exactly. Yeah, it's interesting. And one of the example that I have here of the first article that I got added to the Discover feed. So this was kind of somewhat purposefully put together, but also just a perfect storm type thing. I think it was a lot of it was writing on the title of it. So it's like something pretty unique. I got some feedback that it was pretty like eye-catching and just something that people wanted to click on. But the image that I used as well was also sized to a specific width there, which Google, I'll get into this in a moment, but they have some guidelines about that. And also I made sure that it was as high res as possible. So when you take a screenshot of Google's search results, you gotta, if you were to open that screenshot in Photoshop, then you start like dragging it and stuff and doing things to it, the resolution just goes out the window, and you can't even make stuff out in there. So when I took this screenshot, I purposely zoomed in on the results page. Then I used like a screenshot tool to just take a photo of the page. So that's a starting place, like the core of the image. Then I just put those like just a funny image of a figure coming through the results page and put a Google logo on their face.
Yeah. I mean, it's really easily recognizable. Like it's kind of funny. And it was actually the one that like I found and clicked on and kind of enjoyed a lot because it was really funny as well. Just on a personal note, sorry.
Yeah, that was a fun one to write.
So how are we going with the slides, Brodie? We just want to do a quick time check. We've got about 10 minutes. We've got some more questions coming in too. So how's it looking? Yeah. Maybe we'll just quickly ask this next question. And so Brodie Capel says, how seriously are you taking visual search, especially in the e-com space?
Yeah, I guess when you talk about visual search, I'm not sure the definition that Brodie, great name by the way, is there. But I guess if you're talking about visual search, you're talking about imagery for the most part, and that's a huge component of e-commerce. especially in Google Images now, that if you use structured data on a product page, Google actually shows those product snippets when you click on an image. So you can actually see like the description, the star rating, if it's in stock directly from Google Images. So if you can have the right sort of image on your product page, so high quality, the right sizing, using alt text for discoverability, obviously, then you have a good chance of potentially getting a conversion there, because there is that transactional component. And also something I'm seeing is in general in web search, Google is more frequently showing previews of a specific image for a web page. So if it's like a product page for a Nike shoe, a blue Nike shoe, you might have a preview that's a thumbnail, and it'll turn into a square on the page. And Google has historically only showed that on mobile. So obviously when you do a search on mobile, you want to have a good image there to click through. But now they're starting to test it on desktop. So that image, that hero image, if you want to call it, on your product page, that is the advertising tool, can just be extracted in so many different areas.
Let's get to the rest of your slides, Brodie. I'm really interested.
Yeah.
What have you got here for us?
Awesome. So yeah, I was just going to go back to Google Discover. So specifically about the guidelines. The guidelines are pretty broad. Like I think they're well written. They don't give you too much information, but they do give you some tips about images in particular, which is one of those things that you can control. So looking at the Discover optimization tips article on the Google support page here, there's 6 references to images on there. And that's really the only guidance that they give. So I'd recommend checking out that support doc and learning more about that. But in terms of images, so one of the recommendations they give is to make sure that your image width is at least 1,200 pixels. So just starting with the width, the height, I've seen that vary, and I've seen recommendations for height change. Sometimes I use like 640, sometimes 840. Depends on a lot of different factors, like preview images for different social media sites, the open graph image, something worth testing for different sites. But generally just making sure that that primary image is rectangular and 1,200 pixels wide, around about that. So again, using images that are high res. So back to that that question that Brodie asked about visual search, and I see he's mentioned Google Lens as well in the comments, and yeah, that's a big one. Also with surfaces across Google, that's massive. That's like a whole webinar's worth.
Yeah.
But yeah, high res images that, again, when Google makes them smaller in search results, just making sure that you can still make out what's in the image when they do make it smaller, and making sure that important elements are centered. So I'll have some examples here. So example of a feature image, this is just one that I wrote for Search Engine Land. So it's got a bit of text there, it's high res, it's the right sizing. And if you were to crop that in search results, you've got a very specific section that Google can use, and that can be used as a preview. So this has a magnifying glass there. I've just made it so that the Google logo is out of picture, just so you don't just get an E or an LE on the end and you're just like, oh, what's that? But it just has the search box and the search term or the article topic. And same for this one, exactly the same. It's a lot more focused to the middle. So with this example, there's different elements in each side, but the focus is in the middle still. It can still be cropped, but this one is just like exactly symmetrical. And yeah, this is just another example how those feature images can surface in search. So on the left-hand side, you've got an image that isn't cropped, and on the right-hand side, the image is cropped. So that's something that you have to keep in mind. They can use the full width, or they can just use the center section. And here's an example of just that article that we were discussing that I published recently. It's got how-to schema on there, and this is a test that Google is running at the moment.
Desktop.
Yeah, on desktop. And the image itself, so ideally I would have liked that feature image to be higher resolution as a whole, but it's a screenshot of Google search results. There's only so much you can do there. But it worked out pretty well. I had the important elements centered, and I've got some little eyes peeking through. And if you click on that article, you can see what the actual image was. And just wrapping things up. So number one, know the difference between the different types of featured snippets and the common myths related to each of them. Understand the opportunities of featured snippets, and do your own tests, because every site is different. Every segment is different. Just make sure to figure out what works best for you. If you've got a client who's publishing regularly, spending a lot of time putting out content on their blog, investing a lot of resources in copywriters, graphic designers, strategy, that sort of thing, figure out if they're suitable for Google's Discover feed and do some testing. And finally, the big takeaway here is create some killer feature images. So when you're producing a piece of content, investing time in writing it, you're going to spend some time promoting it. You might put some budget behind it on Facebook, boosting it. Put some effort into the feature image. It can go a long way.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for listening.
Wow, so good. Thank you.
Yeah, that was awesome.
This is, I'm sure something that we're going to have to go back over again and listen to again to extract all the bits of goodness out of there. But since we're just getting towards the end of the webinar, but I just thought what I would like to do is just ask you, just if you had your top, your big number one takeaway, what would you say to people? Go away and focus on this one thing just now.
Yeah, I think I feel like personally the featured snippet topic has been a bit exhausted over the years, and it doesn't feel that actionable for a lot of site owners. But I guess the second part of the presentation about Google's Discover feed, I feel like there's still a lot of confusion around what it is. Is it a black box? Do we actually know that much about it? I feel like that's something that can be cleared up fairly easily if you look to a few pieces of content. So one of the ones I referenced in there was an article that I wrote on Search Engine Journal about feature images in particular, how important that is. And there's also a couple of other articles that I constantly reference as well, one by Abby Hamilton and another by Dan Taylor, and they're both on Search Engine Journal as well. So you could just look up their author pages on Search Engine Journal and you can see those articles. But I'd highly recommend looking into that now. I've seen huge uptake on Google Discover. I've seen the results for clients, seen the results for my own personal SEO blog, and hearing stories. I think it's a big opportunity.
Absolutely.
Nick, do you have a question, a final question for Brodie?
Well, maybe a bit of a comment and just like a final note. So I work with a lot of large e-commerce sites here in Australia, and it's now really something that we're looking at more aggressively as we've largely gone through and fixed like thousands of technical fixes across their site. We're working extensively with their content teams to really look at more specifically and improving the content and writing better quality content to add to the sites with internal linking and all that other really great stuff with structured data. But I think what's really interesting to me about the Google Discover, and you referenced that awesome article by Dan Taylor and Abby. Sorry.
Yeah.
What I thought was really interesting from that was half of that was mainly from like a lot of news publishers, and the other half was like from e-commerce retailers and things like that. my thoughts are like when they were saying like, most of the clicks that they could see that they could analyze across like 10,000 plus sites that they analyzed was it was coming from like product category pages and product like just product landing pages. I think for product landing pages, that's fine. But for product category pages, like maybe a little bit more one last takeaway of how to optimize for that, given there's so many products on that page. What's the kind of things that you would ideally want to optimize for that?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's actually been some really awesome articles put out recently about how to structure content and the sort of content you can put on category pages, like visual design aspects to make the content more digestible, because you ideally just don't want to put a block of text on the category page. But yeah, Aleda Solis actually wrote one, I think like 2 or 3 weeks ago, so really recently. So if you go to her blog, you can read through a very insightful article. And also another article by Cyrus Shepherd, I actually shared it on Twitter just a couple of weeks ago as well. He has a whole infographic and case study on his Zippy blog. And that one was published, I think, 1 or 2 years ago, but it's still like gold. There's a lot of actionable takeaways from that article too. So I'd recommend checking out those two. Better than I could describe here.
Yeah, both really great SEOs in the space and highly regarded. So
absolutely, that's
something. This could be a good conversation to keep going afterwards, because that's a awesome segue for us to keep the conversation going. However, just for now, we've run out of time. So I would like to say thanks everyone for all the great questions. Thanks for everyone watching and listening. And thanks so much for my amazing co-host, Nick Ranger. Please follow her and ask any more questions on Twitter at Nick Ranger SEO. And thank you very, very much, Brodie Clark, for your amazing insights and all the research you do and the great articles, because you're really helping to further the whole SEO industry by doing this kind of work. And I hope to see you in real life soon once we get out of all these restrictions that are going on. Other than that, and yep, so please follow Brodie on Twitter at Brodie SEO. And I've been Peter Mead. You can follow me at Peter Mead IT. Other than that, next month we're going to have Lily Ray, who's going to be talking about a lot of stuff to do with EAT and a bunch of other things going on in search at the moment. So Nick Ranger and myself will be back next month. In the meantime, please feel free to keep the conversation going, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks so much, guys. Thanks, Brodie. Thanks, Peter.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.